Hello, everyone. I'm Rabbi
Hello.
Yael Keller. It's so nice to meet some of you, so many of you here on this screen. I hope you'll forgive me if I'm not able to place your whole person with your Zoom person, but it's nice to at least start seeing people's faces and hopefully hearing voices as we share Torah together tonight and over the course of the year. So tonight is part one of a two-part class on tefillah in relating to the high holidays and to Rosh Hashanah in particular. And my hope is that today we'll think about tefillah sort of in a more general sense. And then next Monday night, we'll come back and if anyone wants to bring their machzor, I will have the text, but it might be useful to bring your own. I'm hearing some feedback. I don't know if other people are as well. I'm just going to mute everybody unless you want to talk, and then you can unmute yourself as you need. So this session we'll be thinking about tefillah in general, why it's not like a radical idea to think about tefillah as sort of off the page of the Siddur on some level. And then next time we'll look at the Musaf Amidah of Rosh Hashanah and think about some prompts for how to make it a more accessible, interactive, maybe sort of spontaneous tefillah environment, because I think just walking into it is sort of difficult. And so that will be next time. So is it helpful for me to share my screen to share the sources, or do people have them printed out in front of them? Yes, that's better. Okay. Okay, before I share the sources, I like that. I like to be in control of who sees what when. But what led me to think about this is that over the last 2 years, for me in Philadelphia, which is where I used to live, and I used to spend Rosh Hashanah, and I imagine for many of you, probably in Skokie Valley and in other places people go, Rosh Hashanah didn't really feel like Rosh Hashanah. Right, the high holidays are known for a very lengthy davening process. We turn page after page of piyutim and songs and extra parts of tefillah. And when COVID changed, all of that changed very radically. We stripped down our tefillot to the bare essentials to make it safe to come to shul for short periods of time. And even as we start to add things back in, I think that process of the stripping down to the bare bones really made me think about the value of the liturgy itself. And I'm sure many rabbis had this process, right? What are we trying to accomplish with our davening? And which tefillot and piyutim were helping us get there, and which ones were distracting or worse, sort of, made us just sort of zone out a little bit at some point. And what helped us achieve our goals? What put us in the space of having like a real spiritual experience on Rosh Hashanah? Suddenly everything was sort of up for debate. And so I think it forced us to look at that a little bit more. And I think that this idea of using tefillah as a vehicle to work for us, to help us achieve goals, spiritual goals, is not a radical COVID new idea, but actually comes from the Gemara and then extends throughout. I am going to share our source sheet. I started in a more modern place, and we'll work our way backwards. Let me make it a little bit bigger here. Oh, that might be too big. Okay. Now I can't see as many faces. So if you do have something you want to say, like, I really encourage conversation and questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself and jump in if I don't see your hand. So I want to start with thinking about prayer more generally, with thinking about Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. So this is a small excerpt from a much larger essay, but he notes that hitpalel, the verb form from which tefillah is derived, hitpalel, from which the word from which tefillah is derived, originally meant to deliver an opinion about oneself, to judge oneself, or an inner attempt at so doing, such as the hitpa'el reflexive form of the Hebrew verb frequently denotes. right? Hitpalel means to judge oneself or an inner attempt at so doing. And that certainly feels appropriate for the Rosh Hashanah season, right? That if davening is sort of about some kind of internal accounting of oneself, judging of oneself, that means we're not only asking God to judge us favorably over the Rosh Hashanah season, but we are confronting our own actions. We're judging ourselves. Thus, it denotes, stepping back into Rav Hirsch, thus it denotes to step out of active life in order to attempt to gain a true judgment about oneself, about one's relationship to God and the world to oneself. So again, thinking about Rosh Hashanah, I think spending, 3, 4, 5 hours in shul for 2 days, and then several hours over the Aseret Tshuva, and then a full day on Yom Kippur, right? Really, we embody this idea of Rav Hirsch's that we have to step out of active life to gain that true judgment, right? That it's hard in the moment to be able to do that. And so shul and maybe the Siddur experience, right, is a place where we can step out of that life to give ourselves the space to think about these things. And he notes that in English, we call tefillah prayer, which only really captures this one sort of small component of tefillah, a minor section of tefillah, which is to ask for something, right? But it really is about so much more, about our relationship to God, about our judging of our own selves, sort of an internal accounting, that there's a lot we need space throughout the year, and especially around the Yamim Tovim, to carve out space to think about our actions and our relationships. I don't want to plow ahead. If people have thoughts or ideas, again, feel free to jump in whenever works. Okay. So that is the basis on which I'm, forming my argument, which is that there's something more to tefillah than sort of meets the eye. And Rev Soloveitchik, who writes in a very maybe intense and sort of dense way. So I brought 2 paragraphs from his Rayonot al HaTefillah. What I want us to take from these 2 paragraphs, because probably we could read them 15 times and find nuance and new ideas each time, is how big how vast the idea of tefillah is. That when you think about tefillah as being captured within the Siddur, it's very constrained and it's almost small, I would say, even a long Siddur, like a machzor. And so to read this, if someone wants to read, they're welcome to. It's all in English. Okay, I'll keep reading. If anyone wants to, they can always raise their hand. To the extent that the individual approaches God, his finite mortal existence is negated. The finite is swallowed in the infinite and expires in its depths. Man sometimes flees from God or hides from him, right? And he brings the quote from Shemot, and Moshe hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God, lest he be swallowed. Man's independence and self-confidence are nullified before God's splendor and glory. If so, then the question arises, how can prayer exist at all? Prayer is standing before God, before the divine presence. How can a person be in God's presence without losing his individual existence? Right. So the Rav is worried about how you could even come to be someone who stands before God. I am focused much more on just that one little sentence, which I think is so beautiful. Prayer is standing before God, before the divine presence, right? The Rav doesn't mention how many piyutim you should read or how many psukim or what time you have to get there in order to be like yotzei on your shacharit, right? This is about so much more than standing in shul with your siddur open and turning the pages. Prayer is supposed to be this experience where you are standing before God, before the divine presence. And so this question, it worries the Rav. It should worry all of us then. And the Rav answers that prayer is a vital need for the religious
I'm happy to read you, El.
Oh, please jump in. I'll take us a little longer.
Prayer is a vital need for the religious individual. He cannot stop the thoughts and emotions, deliberations and troubles which surge through the depths of the soul. His hopes and aspirations, his despair and bitterness. In short, the great wealth that is concealed in his religious consciousness. It is impossible to halt the liturgical outpouring of these feelings. Prayer is essential, fresh, vibrant. Religious feeling cannot exist without it. Or vibrant religious feeling cannot exist without it. In other words, prayer is justified by virtue of the fact that it is impossible to exist without it.
Thank you so much, Tammy. That's beautiful. Right. To me, this is so inspiring. Like, I would rather read this, like I would rather paste this in the beginning of my machzor than anything else. To think that we need prayer, that it is impossible to exist without it, knowing that what does that mean? Prayer means standing before God, and that it contains our thoughts and emotions, deliberations and troubles, right, which surge through the depths of our souls. It's all about what we hope for, what we aspire to over the year, what has made us despair or made us feel bitter. I think there's so much captured in the prayer experience here. And so the question is, how do you get there? And I think for some really holy spiritual people, not myself included, right, they can walk into shul and sit down with their machzor and let the words of the machzor sort of take them away. And that, I find many parts of davening incredibly beautiful, and I feel very connected to God and to the people around me, and it's wonderful. But to feel this sort of level, this surge of emotion and thought, I think is aspirational, at least for me. Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, it sort of puts into perspective. Oftentimes in shuls, you'll see written on a parochet, know before whom you stand.
Yeah.
And yeah, just this phrase from the Rav makes me think of that in a different way now.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's on the front of every Koren door. I'm looking to see if I have one around. I don't think I do. But that's a great phrase. Yeah, thank you for reminding us of that, because I think it's true. If that is the goal, right, to know whom we stand before, this is a beautiful way to remember it. Thanks, Brian. So I think with these two ideas, right, we can take this idea that prayer in itself is really big and powerful when used in its best ways. And certainly the machzor and our tefillot are crafted by our greatest minds and thinkers, our most spiritual religious leaders. So I in no way am saying we should like throw the machzor out the window, or even not bring in more of what we left behind over COVID times. But during that window, I think we saw like that, sometimes you had to daven at home, you had to daven outside of your machzor. And so that was a piece of it for me. And then the other thing is I wanted to share a story here, just a pause in the source sheet, to say that as part of my training at Maharat, I spent a semester as a chaplain in a hospital setting. And in the hospital, I was there during sort of the tail end of the worst part of COVID. I was tasked with going to people's rooms when they wanted some kind of spiritual presence. It was not necessarily Jews. In the neighborhood in which I worked, it was almost never Jews. And although I was comfortable going into the Jewish people's rooms, because I knew that they might ask me to say Tehillim, or they might ask me to say a Mishaberach, or they might give me their name to put in my own Tefillot. These were things that I knew by heart, right? I could rattle off a Mishaberach very quickly by the end of my semester. What at first panicked me was when I walked into some people's rooms, they would hold out their hands and they would say, "Can you pray for me, chaplain?" And what they meant is, I want you to offer some heartfelt words that are extemporaneous. They don't like belong in any prayer book. They didn't want Hail Marys versus Tehillim. They wanted me to speak directly, like channeled through my own self. And that first time I totally choked, who knows what I said, because I had no idea how to just talk to God. And that really, it bothered me. I went home and I talked to my family and I said, like, I went to 13 years of day school, a year in Israel. I've davened for 38 years of my life, and I didn't know what to say when they asked me just to daven for them. And I think that part of my fear was that it didn't feel like it would be authentic. It wouldn't feel Like the words would come easily and I would stumble over them. And like, what if I couldn't articulate my words? And then, I just sort of stammered through something, and that my words wouldn't carry the weight of the words that had been written for me, as I said, by far greater, more knowledgeable spiritual people than myself. But I have to admit, over the semester, I really grew to love those moments in those hospital rooms. What I would do is I would close my eyes, I would hold their hands as they requested, and I would take a deep breath, and I would try to really focus on the patient in front of me who wanted this divine connection, was desperate for connection, and on my own connection to God. And I couldn't hide behind the Misha Berach or a parak of Tehillim. I had to really speak to God. And I would try to search for like the hope and fear that the patient felt, and try to provide comfort, because I wasn't praying for abstract health or even like thinking about someone else's health while I said the Rofei Na in davening. I was saying this really personal prayer for someone who was like 6 inches from my face. And this focus and this really close connection helped me feel a divine presence in a way that is different than I have felt in other spaces, in a way that was really powerful for me. And so that the holding hands, closing of my eyes, offering my own words really helped me focus on exactly what I was asking for or sort of assessing in that moment. Right, I would listen to the patient, and then I would try to incorporate into my prayer things that they asked for. So if they were worried about their family at home, right, not only would I pray for them, but I would say, God, please watch out for this patient's family who's struggling with their fear about her health at home. And it really helped me understand the power of that personal tefillah. And then I got back to school, and my chavruta said to me, in my CPE, in my chaplaincy course, they made us say a prayer for ourselves. And then I really panicked. I thought, it was hard enough to pray for someone else. I can't imagine praying for myself. Like, what would I ask for? It was easy to be bold enough to ask God to cure someone sitting in front of me who was sick. It felt very different to say, God, this year I'm hoping to have this in my life, or to increase that, to change my focus, give me the strength to overcome this challenge. And I think that it's because it felt very foreign to me in the way that I'd grown up davening. And so I think that it actually is just something that got sort of lost along the way. And so I want to look back and try to plug my experience into my more traditional, comfortable setting, if that makes sense. But I do welcome, if anyone else here has experience with sort of extemporaneous prayer, either with others or for themselves, if they want to share now or at the end, I really welcome it. I think it's beautiful. Okay, people can think about it, they can prepare. So if we go back into Tehillim, so really grounding ourselves within the sources. Does someone have
No, I took you off.
Yeah, this is partly because I dislike Elokai Netzor, but that's a whole other story. But because of that, I generally do my individual improvised prayers after the Amida instead of Elokai Netzor. And sometimes it's just stuff, oh, I need this or I need that. Sometimes it's stuff like, gosh, I sure am a jerk sometimes. Please help me not be a jerk, or things like that. But I think that you probably don't want to hear my whole spiel about why I don't like Elokai Netzor, but anyhow.
Maybe another day. I would love
it. But the thing is, the Gemara just said, oh, this Elokai Netzor thing, it's someone that someone said. But it doesn't really tell us to say that. We can, this is a time for our own personal reflection after the Amida.
Great. Mike, you are totally, it's like you read the whole source sheet already. You prepared in advance. Yes, the Gemara has, and I brought some pieces of the Gemara below. As you said, the Gemara recounts lots of beautiful tefillot that rabbis said after their prayer, which is that spot after the Amidah. And I brought one that I particularly liked. But yes, there are many, and the Elokeinu Torah is what sort of got chosen to stay in that spot. I think the value of personal prayer is really important, and the value of making sure people have something to say when they get to shul is also really important. And the struggle for balance is hard because what speaks to one person doesn't speak to another person. And I agree with you that reading through those dapim of brachot, there are ones that speak much more to me than the text of Elokeinu Shema, but that was chosen to be the one. But you're right, definitely. And I love that that's the spot you put your own personal prayer. That's great.
As a chaplain, I think that, when someone's dying of cancer, to say, I hope you're going to get well, it's kind of like you don't know they're going to get well. And someone said to me once, I can't promise they're going to get well, but I can promise they're going to be okay, which means that, they're going to be at peace. And because what I was taught to pray, maybe it's a Christian thing, I don't know, is that I don't really know what's going to happen, but I know it's going to be okay. So it's very hard for me to pray for things, or I can pray for things or pray. I really have a hard time with the prayers on the holidays because I'm constantly saying the same thing over and over again. And, thank God for this and thank God for that. But when I'm doing personal prayers, I don't want to be selfish about it, and I don't want to ask for exact things because I don't know what the right thing is. So anyway.
Yeah, I love that. But yeah, I think, yes, as chaplains, we are cautioned never to say it will be like, well, let's pray for him to get better, especially if something it's not going to get better. Often I would say I would pray to ask God to give the person strength and courage, comfort, relief from pain, right? Things that aren't related to sort of an outcome of one sort or another, but just about process-oriented things. And I also, I love the idea that that you mentioned that, right, sometimes it feels like repetitive to do the davening. And I think those are good moments to sort of step aside from the liturgy and say, this is going to be time for me to use on my own space, if I already feel like I said that thing.
Also, I think that when I'm in the hospital, somebody says a Mishaberik, I'm like, okay, that just isn't enough for me. I would like a little more personal.
I love that. That's great. So this feels very natural to you. That's beautiful. I think it hadn't occurred to me that I could do that. And so I was very grateful for that experience where I learned that I could. And certainly it is very well grounded. So in this one pasuk of Tehillim, it says, right, so it says imre pi, right, that the words of my mouth, but also hagyon libi, which is translated as prayer of my heart, be acceptable or accepted before you, God. And the Radak says, what's the difference between the words of my mouth and the prayer of my heart? So here in the Radak here, it says, it's the things that I don't say out loud, but rather I just think. And that it is a meditation of my heart Even so, let them be acceptable. So you might think that it's only the prayers we say out loud are the prayers that get accepted. But the Radak says, no, even the meditations of your heart are accepted as tefillah. Ki dvarim rabim yachshov adam belibo, right? A person will think many things in their heart, right? That they don't feel able to articulate with their mouths, right? You might have, when you are really focusing on standing before God, right? Knowing who you stand before, as Brian said, and it feels awe-inspiring in that sort of overwhelming way, that you might feel something very deep in your heart that you might be able to like meditate on, but not say out loud, or not even form with your mouth, and that's okay. That's like a totally legitimate form of prayer to use. And so the Gemara also, I think, takes it even one step further. Not just that it's okay, but Rabbi Eliezer says in the Mishnayot of Brachot, he says, "Ha'oset tfilato." This is the beginning of the second page. Ha'oset tfilato kava ein tfilato tachnunim. If a man makes his prayer fixed, it is not true supplication. Right? There's something about just saying the rote words that allows you to check out. And so Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's not real, right? You have to really have your own supplication, your own tachanunim to bring with you. And the Gemara here, commenting on Rabbi Eliezer's statement, they ask here, my keva, what does it mean fixed, right? What is he complaining about, Rabbi Eliezer? And so there are a few options. Yaakov bar Idi, Rabbi says that Rabbi Oshaya says, I hope you can see me. Can everyone hear me? Okay,
Yes.
good.
Yes.
Thank you. I had a sign that said my internet was unstable, maybe nervous. Right, so what is a fixed prayer? Rabbi Oshaya says, according to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, it's anyone for whom his prayer is like a burden upon him, from which he quickly wants to be unburdened, right? So anyone who comes into shul quickly rushes through, and that's not to say that there are not times where you might only have 10 minutes for mincha and that's what you're going to do, but I think the general practice of a person is to act as though their tefillah is a burden to them, right? They're not feeling that awesome presence of the divine, they're just getting through it to be yotze on their chiyuv of davening. Rabbanan Amri, Kol mi she'eno omra b'lashon tachanunim. Anyone who's not reciting prayer in the language of supplication, which Safaria helpfully tells us is, but as a standardized recitation without emotion, right? So if your tefillah is not moving you in some way, and it may be to tears, maybe to laughter, right? Smiling, feeling grateful, gratitude in your heart. I think there are lots of emotions one might feel, but that tefillah is meant to move you in some way. And then the last opinion is Rabba and Rav Yosef Amri Tarveh, who they both say, Kol she'enu yachol chadesh ba'davar. Someone who doesn't add anything new, right? And that's what Mike was saying, right? Is that you can daven the standard tefillah, and then you add a new thing at the end. Your own personal, what I need on the next morning, the 13th in the morning, what I need during Shachrit. And that if you're not able to apply the tefillot to your own need, whether it's a need for a request or to praise God or to ask for help with something, that it has to be new. Right, so one who makes his prayer fixed, one who either acts like prayer is a burden, or doesn't recite tefillah with emotion, or doesn't add his own personal or her own personal element, for them, that is not a true davening in Rabbi Eliezer's book. And I think it's hard, right? It's easier to say, I have 10 minutes, I'm going to rush to mincha, I'm going to feel really good about making it to mincha, right? That's good. That's all good. But to really push ourselves to make sure we don't feel that burden, to make sure we really use our emotion, let the davening take us to a place of emotion, and that we're able to think about it in a novel way, not just for ourselves, but for our family, for our friends, right? But I think for the world, there are lots of tefillot that might be chadash. Any thoughts? Oh, I see a comment in the chat. See? Yes, I think that's a great point, right? Batya and Mike wrote that in Orthodox shuls, often like the faster someone davens, the better a davener we consider them. My father, who when he said Kaddish for his parents, he felt like when they called him up to daven, people were like, oh, him. There's no one else saying Kaddish because he davened very slowly. And he said, I tried to go faster for shul, but I felt like I had to still daven slowly. And that there was sort of this like prize, because people have to go to work. I honestly don't mean it as a judgment. But I think that you're right. There is like a culture of the value of going quickly. Okay. So I want to look at one of these examples of prayer and then finish by sort of starting to turn our attention to Rosh Hashanah. So as I mentioned before, in Brachot on Daf Yud Zayin, and a little bit maybe before and after, there are a list of prayers that different rabbis said after their Amidah. So Rabbi Alexandri, and I just picked one that I thought was pretty and short. Rabbi Alexandri Batzar Tzelote, right after his davening, Rabbi Alexandri Amar, Hachi, this is what he would say. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Hashem Elokeinu, right? May it be your will, Lord our God. Sheta'amdenu bekeren ora va'al ta'amdeni bekeren chashecha. God, please station us in a lightened corner and not in a darkened corner. Va'al yidve libenu va'al yechshu einenu. And do not let our hearts become faint nor our eyes dim. And I just thought that sort of play on our eyes dim and asking us to stand in a lightened corner was very poetic. And the fact that the rabbi asked for our hearts to remain strong, I thought was very beautiful and sort of encompassing. It could include a lot of different things, and just playing with darkness and light. I had sort of this vision of like maybe the rabbi davened in his front room and the sun would come through and he wanted to stand in that bright corner and say his tefillot, and it just felt very beautiful to me. But again, other people, might resonate more with other ones. So I welcome, everyone should check it out. They're very beautiful. Any thoughts or comments? I don't want to cut anyone off before we turn to Rosh Hashanah. Okay. So on Rosh Hashanah, we read this portion and more of Shmuel Aleph in Shul as our Haftorah on the first day of Yantif, and we read about Chana. So I wanted to read this piece here and to think about Chana because I think that she presents a very poignant model for prayer in general. So to remind you, Hannah is unable to have children. And after a painful and difficult conversation, perhaps with her husband, she goes to Shiloh and in great sadness, she cries out, praying to God, right? So after they had eaten and drinking at Shiloh, Hannah rose and stood before the Lord. Oh, Sari, that would be amazing. Please go ahead, Hebrew or English, whatever you prefer.
I'll go with English. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose, and Septuagint adds, and stood before the Lord. The priest Eli was sitting on the seat near the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. In her wretchedness, she prayed to the Lord, weeping all the while. And she made this vow, O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your maidservant and will remember me and not forget your maidservant, and if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life. No razor shall ever touch his head. And she kept on praying before the Lord. As she kept on praying before the Lord, Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard.
Thank you. And I very conveniently cut it off before Eli accuses her of being drunk, right? I didn't want to spoil the mood of our beautiful davening thoughts. Right, but to Hannah, she midaberet aliba, right? She speaks what is on her heart, with no set davening, right? There was no machzor back then. She probably didn't know how to read. Right, there was nothing for her to read from. And so as we enter this time where we daven a lot, right, from machzorim, from sidurim, we daven late at night, we do slichot, we daven early in the morning, we daven all day on Yom Kippur, we daven wherever we do tashlich, we daven in the sukkah, right? Like all of those experiences are heavily, heavily scripted if you choose to go that route. And so when I read the Haftorah again, sort of in a new light, I thought, how can Hannah's prayers inspire our own Tefillot? Because we have our Siddur, right? We don't have to speak simply from our hearts. The rabbis retain a memory of Hannah's prayer on Rosh Hashanah. And the Gemara in Brachot below, which we'll look at in a second, explains that there are 9 brachot in the Rosh Hashanah Musaf, because it corresponds to the 9 times that Hannah mentions Hashem's name in her prayer, right? So the whole Amidah experience is sort of scaffolded around retaining the memory of Hannah's prayer before us. And so the one that I want to focus on here, right, and there's a lot in here about tefillah, right, davening from a place of wretchedness and from marat nefesh, davening right before Hashem, right? It's interesting that the English feels like it needs to add that she's crying the whole time. She makes a vow, right? Like, I'm not sure that that's really like, I don't always want to bargain with God, but it's very common, right? If only I get to shul on time, if only I get to this meeting on time, I'll go to shul every day next week, right? Like, it's not, I've been known to do things like that. And then as she keeps on praying, right, she's praying in her heart and only her lips are moving. Again, sort of brings us back to the Radak, right? Sometimes we can't even move our lips. It's only stuck, the tefillah is stuck in our heart, and that's still meaningful. But here we see in the Gemara that B'chana hi medaberet al liba mikan lemitpalel tzarich sheyichaven libo. Right, the title of the whole shir hopefully now makes sense. Right, Chana spoke in our heart. The halacha is that one who prays must focus his heart on his prayer. Right, and that I think definitely also harkens back to the Tehillim that we looked at, but that this is where we see the power of tefillah. That when she steps out of any kind of scripted prayer that was available, Hannah could initiate a conversation with God. And it allowed her to voice her own expectations of the future, right? For her, she very much wanted a child, which is empowering in itself, right? To be able to articulate what you want, I think is empowering and leads to spiritual growth. And that this act of articulating our goals is a gift that we can take from prayer. And that as Batya mentioned, right, that it's something that we can take with us, even if our hopes and expectations are not met the way that we want them to be met, when it seems that God is not granting us that which we desire in life. And so I think that maybe Hannah's spontaneous prayer allowed her to feel closer to God, unencumbered with her siddur and the tefillot that are the intermediary for us between ourselves and God. And so I think Hannah's story is not just one of infertility, although that should not be forgotten, but it could be resonant with all of our stories and our own quests to close that distance between ourselves and God. And so what I would like to do next time, although certainly there are a few minutes for questions or thoughts or other ideas, but what I want to do next time is to think about how to use our tefillah to articulate our own expectations and goals for davening. We are blessed with something Hannah didn't have, which is the machzor and all of the thoughtful crafting that went into our Musaf Amidah. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, and say like we don't need that, but rather to say, how can we take what Hannah's gift was, her closing this gap in conversation with God, her articulating her own goals, and how can we do that within the framework of our own Amidah? So as I said, for next at the beginning, but for maybe for those who weren't here, just to remind everyone, I'll try to remind people next Monday. If there's a machzor that you intend to bring with you to davening and you want to bring it, I would encourage you to bring Post-it notes or a pencil or a pen, whatever you prefer, to write in the margins. I hope that this will be a tool. If you, like me, just use a machzor at shul, I will have the words written out, and you could print them, or you could just make a note, or you could make a note in your head. I'm definitely not trying to assign homework, but I think that it could be meaningful if you wish to bring your own machzor with you. So I'm going to stop the share so I can see everyone's faces again, and ask if anyone has thoughts or questions, ideas, requests for next time. Now's your chance.
I'm going to share a story about davening. And after Shachris, my friend, he was a survivor. He also davened at the Hashanah show, and he came to my office. He was a little disturbed. He said, if I were to meet the president, would I talk to him as fast as I could? So surely, if I'm talking to God, maybe I should slow down a little bit.
That's beautiful. I love that, Barry. I think that is so true. I had a friend who said, is that how you would dress to go see the president, right? If she tried to rush out in her pajama pants to make it to shul on time. So certainly it's a helpful analogy. Okay. I'm not sure if it's my internet or just a quiet crowd. I apologize if someone was trying to speak and I missed it. Oh, Brian raised his hand. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, I did. I was reflecting a little bit on how you opened tonight with Rav Hirsch and sort of the etymology of to pray being sort of this internal investigation. And I think one of the things, especially around the Yomim Noraim, that I struggle with is really judging myself very harshly. And so it occurred to me also that, when you sort of look internally, there's good things about us as well. It's not all, lacking. And there might be a place, certainly for me, speaking for myself, a place of balance there too.
Yes, definitely. I think of that story about how each person should carry in their pockets, right, 2 pieces of paper, one that says like the world was created for me, and one that says I am but dust of the earth. I agree with you. I think, right, you need both, but a balance is really important. And I think you're right that the Rosh Hashanah liturgy sort of lends itself to the dust of the earth piece of paper. But again, that's the beauty and power of finding the space within your tefillah experience that's off the page, so to speak, because it will give you the space that is so necessary and important to find the world was created for me angle, definitely. And I think in general, it is unfortunately easy for many of us to find our flaws and not our beautiful pieces. But that is unfortunate and not necessary. Maybe I'll just close us off with one last story that everyone's comments were making me think about. The Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman of Liadi, tells the story about a king who mainly stayed within his own palace walls, and that once a year the king would come down out of his castle. Right, I'm sure many of us know the story, through the fields into the city. And if you were wise, the Rebbe told us, you would come to meet the king outside of his palace, because this is the place where he was accessible to us. And that way you would have this strong relationship with the king all year. And he would remember you, the king from the field. Right. And so God, who often I think feels remote, right, especially when we feel sort of negative about our own selves, God is closer and more accessible. We say, right, Hamelach Basadeh, the king is in the field, starting in Elul, through the Yamim Noraim, through Yom Kippur. And this is our chance to open that dialogue. And that sometimes it's scary and it's overwhelming. As Barry said, right, like to go see the president takes a lot of preparation. I think people feel nervous. But this is our chance. And so when we use our resources, our written resources, our spontaneous resources, we can be closer to God than we ever were before, and that will reverberate hopefully for us throughout the year as we approach our relationship to God. So I hope everyone has a good night and thinks about meeting God somewhere over the week, and that hopefully you'll share it with us when I see you again on Monday. So I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. I really look forward to getting to meet all of you, hopefully over Shabbat and Rosh Hashanah or over the end of Sukkot. If you won't be there or you want to meet me sooner, please reach out. I would love to have a Zoom coffee date with each and every one of you. So have a wonderful night, and I'll see you next time.